We tried to look for the most important expertise of our next speaker, and it was impossible. It might have been the fact that she was awarded the Zayed Future Energy Prize in Dubai, or that she was the C. Lima Conference Director last year, or that she organized the first Global Issues Network Conference in South America, with 300 students across the continent discussing environmentally friendly initiatives. Her long list of accomplishments and skills was unimaginable. As if this wasn't enough, we contacted Roosevelt students to ask them what they had to say about her as a teacher. Three words stood out: inspiring, caring, and thought-provoking. One student even said, I always want to hear what Ms. Rumble has to say. She's just an excellent teacher and above all, an amazing human being. Allana Rumble presents in Lightbulb Sessions, How Can Students Be Agents of Change?
Good morning. Thank you for, as Mr. G says, taking the risk to come out on a Saturday morning and do something different. I think that the organizers chose the concept of light bulb sessions very carefully. So I wanted to start by giving a moment to recognize Thomas Edison, the inventor of the light bulb, who was himself an agent of change, which is what I'm going to talk to you about today, to see if there's a possibility that you might become an agent of change as well. This graph is about the fact that even change is changing. Change has, in many different ways, been evolving over time, and for the students in the room today, it has never been at such a fast pace. The point being that change is the only constant. And if we think about that constant of change always happening with respect to the light bulb, I want you to imagine, if you can, for a moment, the vastness of infinite space. Of infinite darkness, before light, before the Big Bang, and then that explosion of light, and all that followed after it, and the earth just a swirling rock, until the invention of fire, the innovation of the human spirit, and then good old Tommy E. with his light bulb, and how much has changed since then. So change is the only constant. How can we be the drivers of change? If change is a horse galloping at full speed, how can we become the ones with the reins in our hands as opposed to just being trailed behind that force? So if the world is going to keep changing, why shouldn't you be the person who decides how? And if that sounds like a great idea, if we want to be Gandhi and be the change that we want to see in the world, it's a great idea. Why don't we all do it? Why aren't we all agents of change? And it turns out that in over a decade of teaching, I've identified 3 main reasons that are stumbling blocks for why students may not choose to move forward. So, reason number 1, you just don't care. Or maybe you care, but you just don't care enough. So apathy is the biggest obstacle. And to explain this, I'm going to use a personal story, a personal history of my own. I have a confession to make. I come from a generation that was labeled as not particularly caring, as a little bit apathetic. I confess that I'm a child of the 80s. And if you look at these images, this was my childhood. This is what I grew up with. Change was all around me. We have Michael Jackson, who sang about change and invested heavily in facial reconstruction surgery to change that. We've got Transformers, right? They were robots in disguise. I mean, that was their whole thing. They could change at a moment's notice. And we even had, of course, the Turtles. Turtles mutated into ninjas with artist names. So change was all around me, but I wasn't driving the change. Here's the evidence. This is me. Those are my pants. And as you can see, I struggled with change all throughout my youth. Change was always happening, but it was happening to me. I was growing, but my pants weren't changing fast enough to keep up with them. And so this was me. For a lot of you, this is you. You know change is happening, but change is happening to you. You're not driving change. But then there came a moment. Something happened in my life that moved me from apathy to action. And it has to do with this. I love the quote that Mr. G has in your programs about storytelling, about the African proverb. where a storyteller tells his story, and when he is done, he places his hands on the ground to leave the story there so that someone else might pick it up. That resonates with me. This is a picture of the lake by my family property. It's on the Canadian Shield, which happens to be the oldest land on Earth. It's 4 billion years old. And it's a property that my grandfather purchased in the 1950s. And when he did that, he did it very intentionally with the purpose that when he was finished telling his story, that land would be there left for us to pick up and continue telling ours. It was a legacy for him. And I grew up with that comfort, with that constant of knowing I will always have this. Even though the world is changing, this will always be for me and my family. And then this happened. This was what moved me from apathy to action. This is a picture of the Adams mine. It's something that Peru and Canada have very much in common, is a strong mining history. And that had always been the history of my hometown. The Adams mine was an iron ore mine. As you can see, it's an open pit mine. In fact, it was one of the largest open pit mines in North America, active for 27 years. And when the owner of the mine realized that the iron had been mined out, the mine was going to have to close, he said, hey, that is a perfectly good hole in the ground. I am so sure there's still a way to make money from this. And so he said, you know what, we could put something in there, in that hole, and make money from it. And he started looking for ideas. What could I put in this big old hole in the ground? Do you know what he came up with? It's hard to guess. 40 million tons of garbage. That was his proposal. That was his proposal, to take Toronto's garbage. Toronto's the largest city in Canada, and they had run out of places to put their trash. So he said, why don't we truck it 600 kilometers north and put it in this perfectly good hole in the ground? Seems like a great idea. Who's going to complain? The population of the area is like 8,000 people. Who's going to care? Well, turns out people did. This is where the family property is on the lake here. This is where the mine is. And that's just a few kilometers between them. So at the age of 14 years of old, I had found something that was going to move me from apathy to action. This was the slogan that was brought forward by a local artist to motivate the people of this region to bring their forces together. Now, you might think that a moose is funny, but for you guys it would probably be a condor. But this is the symbol of the people of the North, and it was a call to action. It was a call for us to find that spark of light within us and fan it into something bigger. Now, I'm going to leave that story there for a second. I'm going to talk about what happens when we move from apathy to action with a case study from a local school. Everybody cares about something. So for me, the family property was something I cared very much about. This is a picture of a very special group of students, and they all care about something different. Some of them, their passion is technology. For some of them, their passion is art. For some of them, their passion is design. For some, it's leadership. But they found a common purpose. They realized there was an opportunity. It was the opportunity to be the hosts of the first ever student leadership climate change in South America. And instead of being apathetic, they rose to the challenge. They were recently recognized with a Global Citizens Award for the American schools in South America for their leadership in bringing over 300 students together. They made a change for the better. When you take all those sparks, even though they're different interests, and you combine them together, all of a sudden you have a fire, you have a flame. Now, apathy is not the only issue. Now, I know this is hard to see, but if all you can see is gray, you've probably got it just about right. Sometimes we're stopped from being agents of change because of the immensity of the problem. Mr. Gallerset might recognize this photo. As you know, many of you I'm sure know, he worked at Roosevelt originally. He was actually one of the first people I met when I moved to Peru from Canada. And he is the kind of person, he's got such a bright flame, he draws other people towards him. And so he said, when he was organizing an event, he said, we're going to do something. We're going to build homes, emergency homes, through a group called Entecha para mi país. He said every grade 9 homeroom is going to organize enough to save enough funds to build a home for a family in need. That sounded like a big challenge, but we said, excellent, we're going to do it. We believed in what he said. And then it got to the point where part of our commitment was also to build a home alongside the family. So many schools participated. We spent an interesting evening overnight in a community center. We woke up first thing in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning. We got our tools, and we were full of hope. We'd spent over a year, and we felt like we were going to do something. We were going to make a difference. And I remember walking up many, many flights of stairs, cold, raining morning. And I got to the top, and I turned around, and I saw this. As basically as far as I could see into the horizon, poverty. And I won't lie, I felt so disheartened. I actually felt foolish for feeling like my actions could do something. But then, the sun came out. Light really does make a difference. And as has happened many times in my development as an educator, it was the students who taught me. It was the students who turned this around. They all lit their fires. You know what they did? They did everything that they could for 16 hours that day until we literally had to take them off the mountain. They gave everything they had to the people who had nothing. Sometimes the problems are big. Often the problems are big and they're complex. But it's not necessarily about solving them overnight. It's about doing what you can, when you can. Because every little bit does make a difference. Now, sometimes, when you shine your light a little bit brightly, you attract attention, and it's not always the wanted kind. So it's true. Sometimes the biggest obstacle to being an agent of change is the resistance from the haters, because you know what? They're everywhere, and haters, they're going to hate. They're usually friends with the doubters, and they have a lot to say. But these two girls in the photo are two of my heroes, two of my personal heroes. In every obstacle, there's an opportunity. And when you experience resistance, which you will if you are an agent of change, developing resistance or resilience is going to help you move forward. And so these two students, they had an idea. After we hosted the first ever Global Issues Network conference in South America, we received a grant for $5,000 to offset our carbon. These students identified that our biggest carbon producer on our campus was our school pool. It actually takes a lot of heat to heat a pool up. And so they developed a project which they called the Power of the Sun, literally to harness solar power to heat the pool. Great idea. It took 3 years from when they started to this photograph. Valeria Wu, who's the girl on the left, was in grade 5 when she began. Raquel Herrera, who's the girl on the left, just graduated last year. Sorry, Valeria was on the left, Raquel Herrera is on the right. And so 3 years. And they had to encounter all kinds of different doubt, all kinds of different resistance. They had friends who said, why are you wasting your time? Who cares about the environment? How is that important? How is that ever going to be a job? They had parents who said, why are you spending so much time on this? What about your homework? What about your other commitments? They had teachers who said, what, you have to miss class again? What about that math test? And they did. They came to a point where they almost gave up. They actually discussed, is this too much? Is our commitment to this taking away from other parts of our life? But they did not quit. So what's happening in this photo is that they're receiving a certificate with a grant for $50,000. The fellow up there on the left is the president of Iceland. The fellow on the right is the chair of Masdar City, the world's first zero-waste, carbon-neutral city in the United Arab Emirates. This is the first time we are finalists in the Global High Schools category, so chosen out of just 12 high schools around the world for progress and sustainability initiatives, and that's what the $50,000 grant was for. We were again finalists this year. Valeria Wu was returned, and the president of Iceland remembers her, pulled her aside and says, you know what? I see real potential in you. You've got great skills. Don't give up. Resistance from the haters will be there, but you don't have to give in to it. And Yoda, don't give in to the dark force. Keep that light inside. So, back to the story of the Atom's Mind. And this is going to be a way to review the 3 main concepts we've covered for why you might not be an agent of change. Apathy. Trust me, at some point, you will find something that you care about, or it will find you. Today's a great opportunity to reflect on that. The second point is the immensity of the problem. How is a small town supposed to do anything about a multi-million-dollar corporation with the power of the largest city in Canada behind it going to protect their land? But what they did, and what this picture shows, is that people who had never worked together joined together. They brought their sparks together to form a flame. So farmers who had never before worked with First Nations Indigenous people joined forces. English-speaking people who'd never worked with French-speaking people worked together. Business and environmentalists worked together. And that's where I came in. This is how I did my small part. When this proposal was first put forward, I was 14 years old. My grandfather was a very influential local businessman. And I said, look, Grandpa, I'd really like it. They're having an information session in the town hall. It's about the environmental impact assessment. Would you please go with me? And he said, fine, let's do that. We'll go together. And my small hand in this battle was sitting there with my grandfather and listening and asking some questions, and then afterwards having a conversation where he had told me his perspective. He grew up in the Great Depression. He thought that any opportunity to bring jobs to our small town might be worth the risk. And I brought him my perspective. I talked about his legacy. I talked about my dream of always having a place to bring my family and our cottage property. And he listened, and he changed his mind. This is a picture taken last summer. That's my nephew, Robbie. He's named after my grandfather. He has picked up the story that my grandfather left behind. He is already an agent of change. In 2004, 15 years after the battle started, it was actually passed into legislation that that good old hole in the ground is never going to be a landfill site. It is now law. In fact, it's now a freshwater lake. So, back to the light bulb. Any thoughts? How many 2014 Nobel laureates does it take to screw in a light bulb? No? We count one? Bold person? Does anyone know who won the 2014 Nobel Laureate Prize for Science? No? It's okay. You weren't supposed to know that one. It was okay. None. The 2014 Nobel Prize for Science went to the inventors of the blue LED light. Thomas Edison was right. There is a way to do it better. Find it. Right now, we actually have now organic LED lights. They're 100 times longer lasting than Thomas Edison's light bulb. And you're going to see that within the next 5 years, there'll be bendable screens for your smartphone with colors that you couldn't even have imagined. That's how fast change is changing. Design made that possible. Art makes that cool. I hope you're considering your options carefully. There are always going to be big problems, and there are always going to be haters. But I am sure that you have the bravery and the courage to move past that. My name is Allana Rumble, and I am an agent of change. That action that moved me from apathy into force was the inspiration for the rest of my educational career. My passion is working with young people to save the planet and the people in it. So from that first small conversation with my grandfather, this is a picture of me with a group of international students, 6 different countries, and we are presenting Cristiana Figueres, who is the head of the United Nations Convention on Climate Change, with a petition. It's a petition for the protection of the Amazon rainforest, because I believe that I need to work for the protection of all people's sacred ground, not just my own. Thank you for listening today. Thank you for lighting up the room with your presence. I appreciate it.